Here we are, stranded on the River Thames. Bad. Not quite the banks of Naimisharanya.
Yeah, well, we're not bad. So we're here, along the Thames.
Yes.
And we've got St. Paul's Cathedral behind us, donging as we speak.
Yes.
9 o'clock on the dot.
Auspicious.
It's very, I don't know how or why it's auspicious, but
well, it's a holy place.
So yeah, we're gonna
read quick because these rocks are not.
I don't see it coming up to be able to hear.
Okay, so it's Canto 1, Chapter 12, Text 26. Should we say the invocation?
Yep.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. When you check me, you check the person, or you check you, the person. Yeah.
That's not it.
Anyway.
No, it's not anyway. We need to make sure it's shooting. Should show, no? It's not.
Why don't you go and see what that message is?
But I can't see it online.
Alright, so text 26. This child will be the father of kings who will be like sages. For world peace and for the sake of religion, he will be the chastiser of the upstarts and the quarrelsome. Purport. The wisest man in the world is the devotee of the Lord. The sages are called wise men, and there are different types of wise men for different branches of knowledge. Unless, therefore, the king or the head of the state is the wisest man, he cannot control all types of wise men in the state. In the line of royal succession in the family of Maharaj Yudhishthira, all the kings without exception were the wisest men of their times, and so also it is foretold about Maharaj Parikshit and his son Maharaj Janamejaya, who was yet to be born. Such wise kings can become chastisers of upstarts and uprooters of Kali, or quarrelsome elements. As will be clear in the chapters ahead, Maharaj Parikshit wanted to kill the personified Kali, who was attempting to kill a cow, the emblem of peace and religion. The symptoms of Kali are number 1, wine, number 2, women, number 3, gambling, and number 4, slaughterhouses. Wise rulers of all states should take lessons from Maharaj Parikshit in how to maintain peace and morality. Oh God. By subduing the upstarts and quarrelsome people who indulge in wine, illicit connection with women, gambling and meat eating, supplied by regularly maintained slaughterhouses. In this age of Kali, regular license is issued for maintaining all of these different departments of quarrel. So how can they expect peace and morality in the state? The state fathers therefore must follow the principles of becoming wiser by devotion to the Lord, by chastising the breaker of discipline, and by uprooting the symptoms of quarrel as mentioned above. If we want blazing fire, we must use dry fuel. Blazing fire and moist fuel go ill together. Peace and morality can prosper only by the principles of Maharaj Parikshit and his followers.
Text 27. After hearing about his death, which would be caused by the bite of a snake bird sent by a son of a Brahmana, he will get himself freed from all material attachment and surrender under the personality of Godhead, taking shelter of him. Purport. Material attachment and taking shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord go ill together. Material attachment means ignorance of transcendental happiness under the shelter. Material attachment means ignorance of transcendental happiness under the shelter of the Lord. Devotional service to the Lord while existing in the material world is a way to practice one's transcendental relation with the Lord. And when it is matured, one gets completely free from all material attachment and becomes competent to go home back to Godhead. Maharaj Parikshit, being especially attached to the Lord from the beginning of his body in the womb of his mother, was continuously under the shelter of the Lord, and the so-called warning of his death within 7 days from the date of the curse of the Brahmin's son was a boon to him to enable him to prepare himself to go back home, back to Godhead. Since he was always protected by the Lord, he could have avoided the effect of such a curse by the grace of the Lord, but he did not take such undue advantage for nothing. Rather, he made the best use of a bad bargain. For 7 days continuously he heard Srimad Bhagavatam from the right source, and thus he got shelter at the lotus feet of the Lord by that opportunity.
Text 28. After inquiring about proper self-knowledge from the son of Vyasadeva, who will be a great philosopher, he will renounce all material attachment and achieve a life of fearlessness. Purport. Material knowledge means ignorance of the knowledge of one's own self. Philosophy means to seek after the right knowledge of one's own self, or the knowledge of self-realization. Without self-realization, philosophy is dry speculation or a waste of time and energy. Srimad Bhagavatam gives the right knowledge of one's own self, and by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, one can get free from material attachment and enter into the kingdom of fearlessness. This material world is fearfulness. Its prisoners are always fearful, as within a prison house. In the prison house, no one can violate the jail rules and regulations, and violating the rules means another term for extension of prison life. Similarly, we in this material existence are always fearful. This fearfulness is called anxiety. Everyone in the material life, in all species and varieties of life, is full of anxieties, either by breaking or without breaking the laws of nature. Liberation or mukti means getting relief from these constant anxieties. This is possible only when the anxieties change to the devotional service of the Lord. Srimad Bhagavatam gives us the chance to change the quality of anxiety from matter to spirit. This is done in the association of a learned philosopher, like the self-realized Sukadeva Goswami, the great son of Sri Vyasadeva. Maharaj Parikshit, after receiving warning of his death, took advantage of this opportunity by association with Sukadeva Goswami and achieved the desired result.
There is a sort of imitation of this reciting and hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam.
In the prison house, no one can violate the jail rules and regulations, and violating the rules means another term. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.
There is a sort of imitation of this reciting and hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam by professional men, and their foolish audience thinks that they will get free from the clutches of material attachment and attain the life of fearlessness. Such imitative hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam is a caricature only, and one should not be misled by such a performance of Bhagavatam Saptaha, undertaken by ridiculously greedy fellows to maintain an establishment of material enjoyment.
Text 29. Thus, those who were expert in astrological knowledge and in performance of the birth ceremony instructed King Yudhishthira about the future history of his child. Then, being sumptuously remunerated, they all returned to their respective homes. Purport. The Vedas are the storehouse of knowledge, both material and spiritual, but such knowledge aims at perfection of self-realization. In other words, the Vedas are the guides for the civilized man in every respect. Since human life is the opportunity to get free from all material miseries, it is properly guided by the knowledge of the Vedas in the matters of both material needs and spiritual salvation. The specific intelligent class of men who were devoted particularly to the knowledge of the Vedas were called the Vipras, or the graduates of the Vedic knowledge. There are different branches of knowledge in the Vedas, of which astrology and pathology are two important branches necessary for the common man. So the intelligent men, generally known as the Brahmanas, took up all the different branches of Vedic knowledge to guide society. Even the Department of Military Education, Dano Veda, was also taken up by such intelligent men, and the Vipras were also teachers of this section of knowledge, as were Dronacharya, Kripacharya, etc.
The word Vipra mentioned herein is significant. There is a little difference between the Vipras and the Brahmanas. The Vipras are those who are expert in karma kanda, or fruitive activities, guiding the society towards fulfilling the material necessities of life, whereas the Brahmanas are expert in spiritual knowledge of transcendence. This department of knowledge is called Jnana Kanda, and above this there is the Upasana Kanda. The culmination of Upasana Kanda is the devotional service of Lord Vishnu. And when the Brahmanas achieve perfection, they are called Vaishnavas. Vishnu worship is the highest of the modes of worship. Elevated Brahmanas are Vaishnavas engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. And thus Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the science of devotional service, is very dear to the Vaishnavas. And as explained in the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is the mature fruit of Vedic knowledge and is superior subject matter above the three khandas, namely Karma Kanda, Jnana Kanda, and Upasana Kanda.
Amongst the Karma Kanda experts, the Jataka expert Vipras were good astrologers who could tell all the future history of a born child simply by the astral calculations of the time, Lagna. Such expert Jataka Vipras were present during the birth of Maharaj Parikshit, and his grandfather Maharaj Yudhishthira awarded the Vipras sufficiently with gold, land, villages, grains, and other valuable necessaries of life, which also include cows. There is a need of such Vipras in the social structure, and it is the duty of the state to maintain them comfortably as designed in the Vedic procedure. Such expert Vipras, being sufficiently paid by the state, could give free service to the people in general, and thus this department of Vedic knowledge could be available for all.
Text 30. So his son would become famous in the world as Parikshit, examiner, because he would come to examine all human beings in his search after that personality whom he saw before his birth. Thus he would come to constantly contemplate him. Maharaj Parikshit, purport. Maharaj Parikshit, fortunate as he was, got the impression of the Lord even in the womb of his mother, and thus his contemplation on the Lord was constantly with him. Once the impression of the transcendental form of the Lord is fixed in one's mind, one can never forget him in any circumstance. Child Parikshit, after coming out of the womb, was in the habit of examining everyone to see whether he was the same personality whom he first saw in the womb. But no one could be equal to or more attractive than the Lord, and therefore he never accepted anyone but the Lord. He never accepted anyone. But the Lord, who constantly with him by such examination, the Lord was constantly with him by such examination, and thus Maharaj Parikshit was always engaged in the devotional service of the Lord by remembrance.
Srila Jiva Goswami remarked in this connection that every child, if given an impression of the Lord from his very childhood, certainly becomes a great devotee of the Lord like Maharaj Parikshit. One may not be as fortunate as Maharaj Parikshit to have the opportunity to see the Lord in the womb of his mother, but even if he's not so fortunate, he can be made so if the parents of the child desire him to be so. There is a practical example in my personal life in this connection. My father was a pure devotee of the Lord, and when I was only 4 or 5 years old, my father gave me a couple of forms of Radha and Krishna. In a playful manner, I used to worship these deities along with my sister, and I used to imitate the performances of a neighboring temple of Radha Govinda. By constantly visiting this neighboring temple and copying the ceremonies in connection with my own deities of play, I developed a natural affinity for the Lord. My father used to observe all these ceremonies befitting my position. Later on, these activities were suspended due to my association in the schools and colleges, and I became completely out of practice. But in my youthful days, when I met my spiritual master, Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Goswami Maharaj, again I revived my old habit, and the same playful deities became my worshipful deities in proper regulation. This was followed up until I left the family connection, and I am pleased that my generous father gave the first impression, which was developed later into regulative devotional service by His Divine Grace. Prahlad Maharaj also advised that such impressions of a godly relation must be impregnated from the beginning of childhood. Otherwise one may miss the opportunity of the human form of life, which is very valuable although it is temporary like others.
Very important instruction for all the parents out there that who are devotees, that it's a wonderful opportunity for you to make a powerful impression, samskar, in the life of your child. And like Prabhupada said, by the mercy of his father, it was instilled in him at a very young age. So very powerful.
And it starts at home. It doesn't start externally in schools or faith group. It starts at home. I have that experience as well, and I went to Burntwood Secondary School. But my parents, because of them, I followed this path. Absolutely. I followed what they did.
Nice. Text 31. As the moon in its waxing fortnight develops day after day, so the royal prince Parikshit very soon developed luxuriantly under the care and full facilities of the guardian grandfathers. Text 32. Just at this time, King Yudhisthira was considering performing a horse sacrifice to get freed from sins incurred from fighting with kinsmen, but he became anxious to get some wealth, for there were no surplus funds outside of fines and tax collection. Purport. As the Brahmanas and Vipras had a right to be subsidized by the state executive head had the right to collect taxes and fines from the citizens. After the Battle of Kurukshetra, the state treasury was exhausted, and therefore there was no surplus fund except the fund from tax collection and fines. Such funds were sufficient only for the state budget, and having no excess fund, the king was anxious to get more wealth in some other way in order to perform the horse sacrifice. Maharaj Yudhisthira wanted to perform this sacrifice under the instruction of Bhishma Dev.
Text 33. Understanding the hearty wishes of the king, his brothers, as advised by the infallible Lord Krishna, collected sufficient riches from the north left by King Maruta. Purport. Maharaj Maruta is one of the great emperors of the world. He reigned over the world long before the reign of Maharaj Yudhisthira. He was the son of Maharaj Aviksit and was a great devotee of the sun god known as Yamaraj. His brother Samvata was a rival priest of the great Brihaspati, the learned priest of the demigods. He conducted one sacrifice called Shankara Yagya, by which the Lord was so satisfied that he was pleased to hand over to him the charge of a mountain peak of gold. This peak of gold is somewhere in the Himalayan mountains, and modern adventurers may try to find it there. He was so powerful an emperor that at the day's end of sacrifice, the demigods from the other planets like Indra, Chandra and Brihaspati used to visit his palace. And because he had the gold peak at his disposal, he had sufficient gold in his possession. The canopy of the sacrificial altar was completely made of gold. In his daily performances of the sacrificial ceremonies, some of the inhabitants of the Vayuloka, airy planets, were invited to expedite the cooking work of the ceremony, and the assembly of the demigods in the ceremony was led by Vishvadev.
Okay, they like that. By his constant pious work, he was able to drive out all kinds of disease from the jurisdiction of his kingdom. All the inhabitants of the higher planets like Devaloka and Pitriloka were pleased with him for his great sacrificial ceremonies. Every day he used to give in charity to the learned brahmanas such things as beddings, seats, conveyances, and sufficient quantities of gold. Because of munificent charities and performance of innumerable sacrifices, the king of heaven, Indradev, was fully satisfied with him and always wished for his welfare. Due to his pious activities, he remained a young man throughout his life and reigned over the world for 1,000 years, surrounded by his satisfied subjects, ministers, legitimate wife, sons and brothers. Even Lord Sri Krishna praised his spirit of pious activities. He handed over his only daughter to Maharaj Angira, and by his good blessings he was elevated to the kingdom of heaven. First of all, he wanted to offer the priesthood of his sacrifice to learned Brihaspati, but the demigod refused to accept the post because of the king's being a human being, a man of this earth. He was very sorry for this, but on the advice of Narada Muni, he appointed Samvarta to the post, and he was successful in his mission.
The success of a particular type of sacrifice completely depends on the priest in charge. In this age, all kinds of sacrifice are forbidden because there is no learned priest amongst the so-called Brahmanas who go by the false notion of becoming sons of Brahmanas without Brahminical qualifications. In this age of Kali, therefore, only one kind of sacrifice is recommended, Sankirtan Yagya, as inaugurated by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Hare Krishna, Hare
Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Text 34. By those riches the king could procure the ingredients for 3 horse sacrifices. Thus the pious King Yudhisthira, who was very fearful after the battle of Kurukshetra, pleased Lord Hari, the personality of Godhead. Maharaj Yudhisthira was the ideal and celebrated pious king of the world, and still he was greatly afraid after the execution of the battle of Kurukshetra because of the mass killing in the fight, all of which was done only to install him on the throne. He therefore took all the responsibility for sins committed in the warfare, and to get rid of all these sins he wanted to perform 3 sacrifices in which horses are offered at the altar. Such a sacrifice is very costly. Even Maharaj Yudhisthira had to collect the necessary heaps of gold left by Maharaj Maruta and the Brahmanas who were given gold in charity by King Maruta. The learned Brahmanas could not take away all the loads of gold given by Maharaj Maruta, and therefore they left behind the major portion of the gift. And Maharaj Maruta also did not again collect such heaps of gold given away in charity. Besides that, all the gold plates and utensils which were used in the sacrifice were also thrown in the dustbins. And all such heaps of gold remained unclaimed property for a long time, till Maharaj Yudhisthira collected them for his own purposes. Lord Sri Krishna advised the brothers of Maharaj Yudhisthira to collect the unclaimed property because it belonged to the king. The more astonishing thing is that no subject of the state also collected such unclaimed gold for the industrial enterprise or anything like that. This means that the state citizens were completely satisfied with all necessities of life and therefore not inclined to accept unnecessary productive enterprises for sense gratification. Maharaj Yudhisthira also requisitioned the heaps of gold for performing sacrifices and for pleasing the Supreme Hari, the personality of Godhead. Otherwise, he had no desire to collect them for the state treasury.
One should take lessons from the acts of Maharaj Yudhisthira. He was afraid of sins committed on the battlefield, and therefore he wanted to satisfy the Supreme Authority. This indicates that unintentional sins are also committed in our daily occupational discharge of duties. And to counteract even such unintentional crimes, one must perform sacrifices as they are recommended in the revealed scriptures. The Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, Yagna tat karmano ant yatra loko yam karma bandhana, that one must perform sacrifices recommended in the scriptures in order to get rid of commitments of all unauthorized work or even unintentional crimes which we are apt to commit. By doing so, one shall be freed from all kinds of sins, and those who do not do so but work for self-interest or sense gratification have to undergo all tribulations accrued from committed sins. Therefore, the main purpose of performing sacrifices is to satisfy the Supreme Personality Hari. The process of performing sacrifices may be different in terms of different times, places and persons, but the aim of such sacrifices is one and the same at all times and in all circumstances, viz. Satisfaction of the Supreme Lord Hari. That is the way of pious life, and that is the way of peace and prosperity in the world at large. Maharaj Yudhisthira did all these as the ideal pious king in the world.
If Maharaj Yudhisthira is a sinner in his daily discharge of duties in royal administration of state affairs, wherein killings of man and animals is a recognized art, then we can just imagine the amount of sins committed consciously or unconsciously by the untrained population of the Kali Yuga who have no way to perform sacrifice to please the Supreme Lord. The Bhagavatam says, therefore, that the prime duty of the human being is to satisfy the Supreme Lord by the performance of one's occupational duty.
Let any man of any place or community, caste or creed be engaged in any sort of occupational duty, but he must agree to perform sacrifices as it is recommended in the scriptures for the particular place, time and person. In the Vedic literatures, it is recommended that in Kali Yuga, people engage in glorifying the Lord by chanting the holy names of Krishna. Kirtanad eva Krishnasya mukta sangha param prajet, without offence. By doing so, one can be freed from all sins and thus can attain the highest perfection of life by returning home back to Godhead. We have already discussed this more than once in this great literature in different places, especially in the introductory portion by sketching the life of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And still we are repeating the same with a view to bring about peace and prosperity in society.
The Lord has declared openly in Bhagavad Gita excuse me, how he becomes pleased with us, and the same process is practically demonstrated in the life and preaching work of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The perfect process of performing yajnas or sacrifice to please the Supreme Lord Hari, the personality of Godhead who gets us free from all miseries of existence, is to follow the ways of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in this dark age of quarrel and dissension.
Maharaj Yudhishthira had to collect heaps of gold to secure the paraphernalia for the horse sacrifice yajnas in days of sufficiency. So we can hardly think of such performance of yajnas in these days of insufficiency and complete scarcity of gold. At the present moment, we have heaps of papers and promises of their being converted into gold by economic development of modern civilization. And still there is no possibility of spending riches like Maharaj Yudhishthira, either individually or collectively or by state patronization. Just suitable therefore for the age is the method recommended by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in terms of the sastras. Such a method requires no expenditure at all and yet can award more benefit than other expensive methods of yajna performances.
The horse sacrifice yajna or cow sacrifice yajna performed by the Vedic regulations shouldn't be misunderstood as a process of killing animals. On the contrary, animals offered for the yajna were rejuvenated to a new span of life by the transcendental power of chanting the Vedic hymns, which, if properly chanted, are different from what is understood by common laymen. The Vedic mantras are all practical, and the proof is rejuvenation of the sacrificed animal.
There is no possibility of such methodical chanting of the Vedic hymns by the so-called Brahmanas or priests of the present age. The untrained descendants of the twice-born families are no more like their forefathers, and thus they are counted amongst the Shudras or once-born men. The once-born man is unfit to chant the Vedic hymns, and therefore there is no practical utility of chanting the original hymns.
And to save them all, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu propounded the Sankirtan movement or yajna for all practical purposes, and the people of the present age are strongly recommended to follow this sure and recognized path. Oh, look, there's only 2 pages left.
Yeah, I was going to finish. My book finishes.
Yeah.
Text 35, Lord Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, being invited to the sacrifices by Maharaj Yudhishthira, saw to it that they were performed by qualified twice-born Brahmanas. After that, for the pleasure of the relatives, the Lord remained a few months. Purport. Lord Sri Krishna was invited by Maharaj Yudhishthira to look into the supervision of the performances of yajna, and the Lord, to abide by the orders of his elderly cousin, caused the performance of yajnas by learned twice-born Brahmanas. Simply taking birth in the family of a Brahmana does not make one qualified to perform yajnas. One must be twice-born by proper training and initiation from the bona fide acharya. The once-born scions of Brahmana families are equal with the once-born Shudras, and such Brahma bandhus, or unqualified once-born scions, must be rejected for any purpose of religious or Vedic function. Lord Sri Krishna was entrusted to look after this arrangement, and perfect as he is, he caused the yajnas to be performed by the bona fide twice-born Brahmanas for successful execution.
Text 36. O Shaunaka, thereafter the Lord, having bade farewell to King Yudhishthira, Draupadi, and other relatives, started for the city of Dwarka. accompanied by Arjuna and other members of the Yadu dynasty. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the first canto, 12th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Birth of Emperor Parikshit.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. It's nice to be with you all again, and we're gonna conclude now. We need to get off this rock. It's a bit rocky.